guys, it's Madam Morbid here. So today I'm going to switch gears a little bit to a true crime story. It involves a baby named Lloyd Keat who was taken out of his bedroom by a kidnapper while the maid was sleeping in the room next door. If that sounds familiar to you, it's because it happened again in the 1930s with the Lindbergh baby. This story was just as much a news sensation as the Lindbergh baby was. So you pretty much haven't heard of it because the Lindbergh baby made everybody forget about it. We are going to go see the house. It's still there, and then I'll tell you the rest of the story. So this is the entrance to the neighborhood, Meadowmere Place. In 1917, this would have been almost out of town. So we're pretty close to the Missouri State University campus, and at the time, past this, there wasn't a whole lot of development. Now it's kind of in the middle of town. This is the Keat home today. James Holland Keat was vice president of the Holland Banking Company. There were a lot of children in Meadowmere Place who could have been chosen as victim of this. However, the Keat house was somewhat secluded, covered by thick, mature trees. There was a rock wall surrounding the home, so it gave the kidnapper a measure of privacy that some of the other homes in the neighborhood did not. The maid was sleeping in the room next door. She was sleeping there with his 3-year-old little brother. Upstairs was another maid. The kidnapper went in through an unlocked front door and got baby Lloyd and handed him out the window where they had busted out the screen. Someone was standing outside. They found footprints on the ground outside the window. Mother and father, James Holland Keat and May Keat, were at the country club. It was the opening of the season. It's May 30th. They got home around midnight from a dance. When mothers get home, one of the first things we always do is go check on our children. So she went to the nursery, looked in on baby Lloyd, and he was not there. Her first instinct was that he must be sleeping with Jenny. So she went upstairs, asked the maid about who said he'd been in bed the last time she saw him. So it was then they knew that baby Lloyd was missing. The house was searched thoroughly. The bedding was gone from his bed. And that's when they noticed that the screen was loose on the window and that it was on the ground. The next morning, the family received a ransom note. It said, "We've got your kid. Don't say anything to the police or put it in the papers. There are 3 of us and we want $2,000 apiece, so it will cost you $6,000 to get him. We got another one picked out, so if we don't get this from you, we can tell them to see what we done to yours." The kidnappers included a piece of fabric cut from baby Lloyd's nightgown. They told him to turn on the sign at the Hare's dry goods store whenever he left to deliver the ransom money. They gave a long, convoluted route that he was to drive from downtown Springfield to Ozark, across to Nixa, to Campbell, down Campbell. It was a long, rambling way. He was to drive 12 miles an hour the whole way. And at some point, the kidnapper was going to come out and stop him so that he could give them the ransom money. Holland Keat wasn't actively talking to the police. Word spread very quickly just by word of mouth. Everybody knew about the kidnapping. Everybody knew about the ransom note, how much they wanted. They wanted the money in 5, 10s, and 20s. Mr. Keat went and got the money. The police were working on this, though. Within 24 hours, they had a really good lead. George Walker drove a taxi, and he was talking to a policeman friend of his, and the policeman asked him what he thought about the kidnapping. Walker said, "I think I know who did it," and the policeman was shocked. He said, "Okay, tell me more." Several months prior, Walker had been approached by Taylor Adams, offering him $50 for the use of his taxi. Walker said, "Sure." They pull up in front of a house on Elm Street. They're watching this house. It's the house of a jeweler, C.A. Clement. There was another vehicle following the taxi, and all of the people in that taxi had guns, and then everyone's wearing a black mask. Walker says, "What is this, a kidnapping? I'm having absolutely nothing to do with this." Taylor Adams says to him, "What's wrong? Are you scared?" And Walker says, "Well, I don't know whether I'm scared or not, but I sure don't want to be taking part in whatever you all are up to." The police start watching the Adams house, and he had several children, 2 of whom worked for the Hare's dry goods store. There was Cletus and there was Maxie. They were drivers for the hardware store, which, if you remember, the kidnappers wanted them to turn on the sign at Hare's. Taylor had been working as a strikebreaker for the Springfield Traction Company. There was a big streetcar strike going on at this time. It had been going on a really long time, since September of 1916. So now it's early June of 1917, and this is still going on. And there were a lot of hard feelings, and strikebreakers were not looked upon very positively by a lot of people. So while all of this is going on, Mr. Keat is preparing to deliver the ransom money. He has been instructed to drive an open car. He practices the route once before he actually does it. The night he does it, May 31st, was a Thursday night, and it was extremely stormy. Bad thunderstorms, torrential rain. So he's in this open car driving 12 miles an hour through this torrential downpour. He does everything they tell him to do. He goes on these strange back roads. No one ever comes forth. He gets home absolutely exhausted, drenched, covered in mud, without the baby. The next morning, he gets another ransom note. It said, "It didn't take us long to find out what was up last night. We told you we would see anything that didn't look right. Every saloon in town knows how much we wanted and which way we told you to go. When we seen what was up on the road, we come in. The kid is a good one. He ain't cried but once. We're going to give you one more chance. So tonight, between 8 and 9 o'clock, we will telephone you where to go and find direction for road. Be ready to go. Don't stop any place. We will give you a dry road so mud won't hurt, and you won't have to go over 20 miles. Mr. Keat tried desperately to deliver the money the second night, and again came home empty-handed. On June 30th, Taylor Adams was arrested in Kansas City. He had letters on him from a young man named Claude Pearsall, which showed that they were involved in some sort of plot. Adams was questioned. He admitted to being involved in a plot to kidnap the jeweler C.A. Clement, but he denied having anything to do with baby Keat. They also arrested his wife, Allie, his 2 sons, Claude and Maxie, and in questioning all of these people, an abandoned house kept coming up, the Crenshaw Mansion. That was where they were supposed to take Mr. Clement after they kidnapped him. So this Crenshaw Mansion, it was a 14-room home built before the Civil War, but it was not occupied by the Crenshaw family all the time. So it was empty a lot. There was a caretaker, but he didn't check on it every day. When that house was searched, they did not find baby Lloyd. However, they did find evidence that people had been staying in the house. There were cigarette butts on the floor, evidence of people eating and having meals. So it looked like possibly the baby had been there. According to Adams, Claude Pearsall was the leader of the gang. Claude was 20 years old, and his father, W.R. Pearsall, was a veterinary surgeon. His associates called him Doc. I don't know how they expected to get away with this. Who hires a taxi to kidnap someone? Their idea was to kidnap the baby, get the $6,000 from the dad, kidnap the dad when he dropped off the money, demand $10,000 for him, and then it was expected that his other wealthy friend would come for him, and then they would kidnap that guy and demand $100,000, progressively demanding more and more and more money. But things went wrong. When the police did not find anything, Mr. Keat's friends decided to take a look themselves. They went back to the home. For some reason, the police did not search the cistern at the house. So they took the cover off. The caretaker of the home was there with them, and they looked down into it, and all they saw was water. So they grabbed a hook and felt down into the water, and they hooked onto wires attached to a bundle. Once they got the bundle out of the water and took a look at it, it turned out to be the body of baby Lloyd. This is the grave of baby Lloyd Keat, located in Maple Park Cemetery. His family called him Buddy. He was almost 15 months. The discovery of his body enraged the people of Springfield. Fearing a lynching, the sheriff took the prisoners and headed toward Jefferson City to put them in the state penitentiary there. Springfield had a history of lynchings. There had been one only 11 years prior to this, in which 3 men were lynched on the square. A crowd had gathered on the square, hoping to do this to Pearsall. Around the Stockton area, the mob caught up with the sheriff, and they demanded he give them Pearsall. They promised, they said, "We'll give him back to you alive. We just want to question him." And so the sheriff complied. He handed Pearsall over to them. They strung him up to a tree, and basically proceeded to torture him, trying to get him to confess. He was hauled up, strangled until he passed out or nearly passed out, and he was lowered, revived, and they strung him up again. They did this 3 times. The trial was a news sensation. As you can see in this photo, there were 7 suspects. Dick Carter would end up turning state's evidence against Pearsall. As a consequence, he was not convicted of anything. Sam McGinnis had charges dropped against him, as did Maxie Adams, because he was only 16 years old and his entire family was involved in this. The judge decided that he really was too young to have a choice in the matter. Claude Pearsall was convicted. A lot of it was from the taxi driver, George Walker, things associated with the Clement kidnapping. Also, handwriting experts argued that he definitely wrote the ransom notes. I'm going to put up samples of his handwriting. I believe it is the same handwriting. He has tried to alter it a little bit, but if you look at the individual letters and the way they're written, it is the same. It's just a little sloppier in the ransom notes. Pearsall made some bizarre claims. He claimed that he was kidnapping all of these people to raise money for the German war effort, which the United States had just entered World War I. The FBI did not believe there was any validity to anything he said. He claimed there was a shadowy head of this organization by the name of Riley, who was from Chicago and had been brought in as a strikebreaker during the streetcar strike, but there was never any evidence to show that Riley was involved, and so he was never considered a serious suspect. I don't know what Pearsall thought he was doing by saying he was trying to raise money to help our enemies in the World War. They'd already tried to hang him, but I don't understand why he thought he would benefit from that. And in the end, he got 35 years in prison for the kidnapping and murder of baby Keat. Taylor Adams and his son Claude, after seeing what happened, they decided to plead guilty in the hopes that they would get a lighter sentence. They got 15 years and 10 years, respectively. Claude Pearsall only served 21 years of his sentence, and he spent the rest of his life living in Kansas City, where he worked as a locksmith. He eventually did confess. According to Pearsall, baby Lloyd was killed June 8th with an accidental overdose of laudanum. Baby Lloyd was only 14 months old. He would not have weighed very much, and he would not have been able to handle a very large dose of that. They were probably trying to keep him quiet. I have wondered if he did not die earlier than that, given that they never showed up to get the money from his father. The water in the cistern was pretty cold. It was difficult to tell how long he had been there. The Keat family were devastated by the loss of baby Lloyd, especially his mother, May. After the baby's death, iron bars were installed on the windows in the home. His 3-year-old brother, Jimmy, he became a very well-respected attorney and eventually a circuit court judge in Springfield. And he recalled how his mother was just always so frightened for him. One night he forgot to let her know he was going to be late, and he would have been a teenager at this time, and she went absolutely ballistic. She had already lost 2 children. They had a stillborn child in 1910, a little boy, and then a few years later in 1917 losing baby Lloyd. It was just so hard on this family. Mr. Keat died in 1945 when he was 61 years old. May Keat lived a long life. She always lived in that house, and she died at the age of 94 in 1980. After baby Lloyd died, she never allowed anyone to ever take her photograph ever again the rest of her life. She didn't have a lot of friends. She wasn't really interested in being around people. Her family did say she loved her family. She liked to be around her family, but she just was not interested in really getting out there much and seeing a lot of people. This was considered one of the most heinous crimes ever. It was covered in newspapers from sea to shining sea. Kidnapping of babies like this just did not happen. Roscoe Patterson worked as a special prosecutor on the case for the family. At that time, you could hire someone to be a special attorney for you in certain cases. So he worked with Paul O'Day on the case, but Roscoe Patterson later in his career would go on to be a United States representative for Missouri, and he also was a United States senator. Even though he had introduced a bill to make kidnapping a felony, the bill didn't go anywhere until the Lindbergh baby kidnapping happened in 1932. And at that point, finally the law was taken up and it was passed. And to this day, kidnapping is still a felony offense in the United States. And it all comes back to this case that probably hardly anyone has ever heard of. But it did take the Lindbergh baby kidnapping to finally lead it to passage. Supposedly, the FBI came to Springfield in 1932 wanting advice or wanting to know how they were able to find baby Keat so quickly. But really, I don't think Springfield had a whole lot to share other than he was kidnapped by a bunch of dumbasses who told everyone they possibly could that they were planning to kidnap a rich jeweler. So, and they admitted where their hideout was, and authorities didn't even find baby Lloyd. It was friends of his father who found the body. So I don't know that the FBI learned a whole lot from people here. Thank you all for sticking with me today, for listening to this story. It devastated a family. It ended the life of a precious child, and sadly it put Springfield all over the news for all the wrong reasons. But join me next time for our next historical adventure. Take care.